You know what? Maybe we shouldn't even be doing this anymore. My parents were right about you. You're just a downgrade from Derek anyway. Those words didn't come from a stranger. They didn't come from an enemy. They came from the woman I had quietly rearranged my entire life for, the woman I had chosen over and over again, in ways she never fully saw and her family never bothered to acknowledge. My name is Joshua Carter. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of how the worst night of my life became the first night of the rest of it. I need you to understand something before we go any further, because if you don't understand this part, none of what comes after will make sense the way it needs to. I was not a rich man when I met Laura Simmons. I want to be honest about that. I was a 27-year-old man with a small consulting firm, 2 contractors, 9 clients, and a vision I was still quietly building toward. I paid my bills. I had savings. I had a plan. But I didn't have the kind of money that announces itself when you walk into a room, and in the Simmons household that was the only kind that counted. My father taught me something when I was 16 years old, standing in our small Columbus apartment watching him pay a bill at the kitchen table without a single word of complaint. He set the pen down, looked at me and said, "Son, build in silence. Let success make the noise." I carried that with me everywhere I went. I carried it into my business. I carried it into my relationship. And I carried it, quietly, faithfully, into a family that mistook my silence for smallness. That was my first mistake. Not the silence, but believing that the right people would eventually see through it. The first time I truly understood what I was dealing with inside that family, I was standing in a hospital billing office on a Thursday afternoon with $6,000 I had moved from my business savings account the night before. Laura's father, Gerald Simmons, had suffered a cardiac episode 3 weeks earlier. It wasn't fatal. The doctors called it a significant warning, but the bills that followed were anything but minor. $14,000 after insurance. Laura had called me panicking, voice cracking, and I had listened to every word without interrupting. When she finished, I didn't make a speech. I didn't negotiate. I told her I would handle what I could, and I did. $6,000. Quietly transferred. No announcement. I told Laura privately and asked her specifically, "Please don't make it a thing." She nodded. She hugged me. She said she didn't know what she would do without me. What she didn't tell me, what I only found out 2 days later through a passing comment she made, was that Derek had sent a $200 Venmo with a get well emoji. And her mother Patricia had called him personally to say thank you. I had paid nearly half the bill. Derek had sent the price of a grocery run. And somehow in that household his name was still said with more warmth than mine. I remember standing at that billing counter watching the clerk process the transfer, and she looked up at me with this expression, half surprised, half respectful, and said, "Sir, this is a significant amount." I just nodded. Because in my family you didn't perform generosity. You just did it and kept moving. But when I walked into Gerald's hospital room that afternoon with coffee and flowers, he was mid-sentence, looking past Laura toward Patricia, asking, "Did Derek call back yet?" Nobody noticed the way I adjusted my grip on those flowers. Nobody saw the thing that moved behind my eyes. I smiled, set the coffee down, pulled up a chair, and sat in that room like a man who hadn't just paid $6,000 to be invisible. Then, as I stepped into the hallway to give them a family moment, I heard Patricia's voice through the cracked door, low but not low enough. "He's a decent enough boy. But decent doesn't build futures." I stood there for 3 full seconds. Then I straightened my jacket, walked back in, and smiled like I hadn't heard a word. But I had heard every word. And something in me, quiet, patient, the part my father built, filed it away. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Because my father also taught me this. The moment someone shows you their ceiling for you, believe them. Don't perform for a room that's already scored you. Just keep building. The numbers will speak eventually. I just didn't know yet how long eventually would take, or how much I would lose before it arrived. The Thursday before Thanksgiving, Laura mentioned, casually the way you mention weather, that dinner at her parents' house was going to be low-key this year. Just family. Maybe a couple of close friends. Nothing elaborate. I told her I'd take care of the food. She smiled and said I didn't have to do that. I told her I wanted to. That was the kind of man I was. I didn't show up empty-handed to places that mattered to the woman I loved. So I spent $340 on a full catered spread from a restaurant Laura's mother had mentioned once. Just once, in passing, 3 months earlier, because I had filed it away the way I filed everything. I pressed my blazer the night before. I bought Gerald's favorite bourbon, Woodford Reserve, the double oaked, not the standard, because I had noticed it on his shelf 6 months ago and remembered. I even bought a card and signed both our names on it, Laura's and mine, because I thought that's what couples did. I thought that's what building a life together looked like in the small gestures. I carried everything to the door myself. Laura was already inside. I could hear voices and laughter from the porch. I adjusted the bags, rang the bell with my elbow, and when Patricia opened the door, she looked at what I was carrying and said, "Oh, Joshua, you didn't have to do all this." In that tone people use when they mean exactly what they're saying. You didn't have to, and it doesn't change anything that you did. I walked in, set everything down in the kitchen, and then I turned around toward the living room. Derek Hollis was leaning back in a chair at the far end of the room like a man who had never left. He was wearing a fitted charcoal shirt, one ankle resting on his knee, holding a glass of something amber, in the middle of a story that had Gerald laughing with his whole chest. The kind of laugh I had never once pulled out of that man in 3 years of trying. Laura was on the couch 2 cushions away from him and she was smiling too. Not the polite smile she used at work events. The real one. The one I thought was mine. Gerald saw my face. He didn't flinch. He just said, easy as breathing, "Oh, Joshua, you remember Derek?" He just stopped by. Derek stood up and extended his hand. "Good to see you, man. Laura talks about you." The way he said it, the particular rhythm of it, the almost smile that followed, communicated something that his words didn't. The way she talks about you is not the way a woman talks about a man she's chosen. It was the kind of sentence designed to settle into you slowly like cold water. I shook his hand, smiled, said it was good to see him too. Then I went back to the kitchen and began setting out the food I had bought, the food Patricia hadn't asked for but accepted, the food that would sit on that table and feed everyone in that room including the man who had shown up with nothing and was somehow already home. I spent the next 3 hours at that dinner being the most invisible I had ever been in my life. Conversations moved around me like water around a stone. Gerald talked about football, about the neighborhood, about a property investment he'd been watching, and twice he referenced what Derek had done at Derek's age as naturally as breathing, as though I wasn't sitting 4 feet away having catered the entire meal. At one point Patricia touched Derek's arm and said, "You always had such a good eye for these things." She had never once touched my arm. And through all of it Laura said nothing. Not a redirection. Not a quiet look across the table that said, "I see you. I know. I'm sorry." Nothing. She laughed when the room laughed. She deferred when her parents spoke. She existed in that house as her parents' daughter first and my girlfriend somewhere further down the list. I excused myself to the kitchen after dessert was served. Stood at the counter for a moment with my hands flat on the marble. Took one slow breath. Then I pulled out my phone. There was an email from Philip Adare, the Dubai logistics contractor I had been in early conversations with for months. The subject line read, "Final call, offer closes Friday." I stared at it. The number in that offer was $340,000. 14 months of work. Life-changing. The kind of thing my father would have told me to run toward without looking back. I put my phone in my pocket. Walked back to the table. Poured Gerald another glass of his bourbon, the bottle I had brought. He accepted it without looking up from his conversation with Derek. That night, driving home alone, Laura stayed behind to help clean up. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a gas station for 11 minutes. Not crying. Not angry. Just sitting with the specific weight of what it feels like to be in a room full of people and understood by none of them. Then I started the car. And drove home. And did not reply to Philip Adare's email. Because Laura had asked me not to take that contract. She'd cried. She'd said she couldn't do long distance. She said she needed me here. I chose her. In a gas station parking lot on Thanksgiving, after being invisible for 3 hours at a dinner I paid for, I chose her again. I was still choosing wrong. I just didn't know it yet. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, Gerald sat back in his armchair after dinner and looked at me the way a man looks at something he's still deciding the value of. The conversation had drifted toward real estate. It always drifted toward real estate in that house. And Gerald was talking about property values, about timing, about men who understood how to position themselves early. Then he turned to me. Not unkindly. That was always the thing that made it worse. There was no malice in it. He said, "You know what I always admired about Derek? By 27 he had 2 properties. He was building something real. A man needs to be building something you can see." I looked at him steadily. "I am building something, sir." "Yeah." Not curious. Measuring. "What kind of something?" Before I could answer, Derek leaned forward from across the room, because of course Derek was there again because Derek was always there, and said, "He's talking about that consulting thing, right?" Laura mentioned it. He said consulting thing the way you'd say someone's childhood hobby. Gentle. Dismissive. Perfectly calibrated. The room shifted slightly. Patricia smiled into her coffee cup. Laura looked at the table. And Gerald nodded slowly, like a man who had just had a quiet suspicion confirmed. I picked up my glass. Took one slow sip. Set it down. You're right, Mr. Simmons. I'm still building. I didn't defend myself. I didn't pull out numbers. I didn't tell him that my firm had 9 active clients, that revenue was up 34% that quarter, that I had a $340,000 international contract sitting in my inbox that I hadn't touched because his daughter asked me to stay. I said nothing. Because my father taught me that a man who argues his worth to someone who's already decided is just exhausting himself for nothing. But that night, alone in my car, I opened my business dashboard and looked at those numbers quietly in the dark. Then I opened the Dubai email. Read it once. Didn't reply. Closed the phone. Not yet. But the word yet was beginning to carry real weight. 3 months before the breakup, I called Laura at 9:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. It rang twice and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, something simple, just checking in, and sat with my phone face up on my desk for 30 minutes while I tried to finish reviewing a client proposal. She called back at 10:23, slightly breathless, voice arranged just a half-second too carefully. Said she'd fallen asleep. Said she was sorry. Said she'd call me in the morning. I said okay. I believed her, or I told myself I did, which at that point was close enough to the same thing. The next afternoon Marcus slid his phone across the coffee shop table without a word and watched my face. It was Derek's Instagram story from the previous night. A restaurant. Low lighting. 2 cocktail glasses. No faces. Captioned, good company. The timestamp was 9:51 p.m., 4 minutes after my first call went to voicemail. I looked at it for a long time. It might not be her, I said. Marcus just looked at me. I know, I said. I know. I slid his phone back, picked up my coffee, and didn't say another word about it, not because I was in denial, but because I was not the kind of man who accused without standing on solid ground. I watched instead, the way my father watched, quietly, carefully, filing things away. What I noticed over the following weeks, she took calls in the other room more often. She laughed differently sometimes when she came home late. She stopped asking about my work with the genuine curiosity she once had. Small things. The kind of things that don't prove anything individually but collectively build a case that sits heavy in your chest at 2 a.m. That night I opened my laptop and pulled up the Dubai email chain for the first time in weeks. I didn't reply. But I didn't close it either. I just left it open while I worked. Like a door I was finally allowing myself to look at. It was a Tuesday night. I was on the couch with my laptop open, reviewing a proposal for a client presentation I had at 8 a.m. the next morning. The apartment was quiet the way apartments get after 11 p.m., settled, still, the kind of quiet that makes small sounds loud. I heard tires on the driveway. Slow. Careful. The way someone drives when they're trying not to be heard. I looked up. Headlights through the curtain. I didn't move immediately. I just watched the light on the wall, the way it held and then dimmed as the engine cut. Then a car door. Then Laura's laugh. That specific one, the charming one, the one she turned on when she wanted someone to feel chosen. I walked to the window. Parted the curtain with 2 fingers. Derek's car. Derek at the driver's door, relaxed, one hand in his pocket. Laura 1 step away from him, and then she moved forward and hugged him. Not a polite hug. Not a goodbye hug. The kind that carried memory in it. The kind that lingered 3 seconds longer than friendship. I let the curtain fall. Stood in the dark living room. Counted, without meaning to, 7 full seconds. Then I went back to the couch. Sat down. Opened my proposal. Typed 1 line. Stopped. The front door opened. Laura walked in and startled slightly finding me awake. I thought you'd be asleep. I was working. I didn't look up immediately. Then I did. How was your friend? Pause. Half a second. Enough. Good. Was good. We just lost track of time. Which friend? Keisha. Keisha live on the north side now? I asked. Still calm. Still quiet. Because that car that just dropped you off had south side plates. The room went completely still. And in that stillness, something that had been bending for months finally snapped clean. The argument came fast. Laura pivoted immediately. I was controlling, suspicious, insecure, suffocating. She didn't answer the question. She buried it under accusations designed to make me defend myself instead of pursue the truth. And I understood the tactic even then, even in the heat of it. I had watched her use it before on smaller things. I stayed quiet until she finished. Then I said, I asked you 1 question, Laura. 1. You're acting like you own me. Like we're married. I turned down a $340,000 contract to stay here with you. It was the first time I had ever said it out loud to anyone other than Marcus. The number entered the room like something physical. She stopped. I watched her recalibrate behind her eyes. Then she said, "That was your choice." It was, I agreed. And so is this. So is what? What exactly are you going to do, Joshua? I said nothing. And the silence stretched long enough that something cracked open in her. Some pressure that had been building for months, maybe years, in that house on Sundays at her parents' table, in every comparison, every bourbon glass passed to Derek, every conversation that moved around me like I was furniture. She said it like it had been sitting on the edge of her tongue for a long time, waiting for permission. You know what? Maybe we shouldn't even be doing this anymore. My parents are right. You're a downgrade from Derek anyway. The room went silent. I looked at her for a long moment. My face didn't crumble. It didn't harden. It settled, the way a man's face settles when he hears the last piece of information he needed to make a decision he'd been quietly delaying. Okay, I said. She blinked. She expected a fight. Okay. Okay, I said again, and I walked to the bedroom. Not to pack. Not to storm out. To sleep. Because tomorrow, everything was starting differently. I woke up at 6 a.m., made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote a list. No anger in it. No performance. Just clarity, the specific, clean clarity that comes when you finally stopped negotiating with a situation and started responding to it honestly. The list: stop the auto transfer to Laura's family emergency fund. Cancel the supplemental insurance I had quietly added to Gerald's coverage 6 months ago. Remove myself as secondary payer from the remaining medical invoice balance. Email Philip Utara. Schedule a contractor meeting. Call Marcus. I completed every item before 9 a.m. The reply from Philip came within the hour. He wrote, "Joshua, I was wondering when you'd come back. We held a modified version of the role. Call me." I read it twice. Then I smiled, the first real, full smile I'd had in longer than I could honestly remember. Not because I'd won something, but because a door I had locked from the inside was finally open again. Marcus arrived by noon. I slid the legal pad across the table without explanation. He read it slowly. Looked up. "You good?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally am." He looked at me for a moment, the specific way Marcus looked at you when he was deciding whether you meant something, and then he nodded once. "Okay then. So what are we building?" I pulled my laptop across the table. Opened the Dubai email chain. And for the first time in 8 months I started typing forward instead of holding back. My father's voice was in my head the whole time. Build in silence. Let success make the noise. I had been silent long enough. Now it was time to build something worth the noise. 5 days after the breakup, Laura came to the apartment. I knew she would. She had that energy, composed, rehearsed, the kind of careful calm that takes preparation. She expected to find an apartment that reflected her absence. Dishes in the sink. Curtains still drawn. A man sitting in the particular stillness of someone who doesn't know what to do with himself. Instead, the apartment was clean. I was in a blazer. There was a printed and signed contract on the kitchen counter. The Dubai engagement, 14 months, the number I had turned down for her 8 months ago, now restructured and confirmed and bearing my signature. She sat. I didn't. I leaned against the kitchen counter in my own space in a way I realized, in that moment, I had never fully allowed myself before. She gave her speech. She was measured, careful. Something about the heat of the moment, about the value of what we'd built, about not throwing away years over one bad night. She didn't apologize. She reframed. There's a difference, and I knew which one she was doing. When she finished, I said, "I appreciate you saying that." She waited. "So?" "I fly to Dubai in 3 weeks. Silence. "What?" "The contract I turned down for you 8 months ago," I said. I called them back. They held a modified version of the role. Her eyes moved to the contract on the counter. She looked at the number. I watched the moment it landed. "Joshua, you can't just." "Laura." My voice was quiet, steady, final. "You told me what your family thinks of me. And I'm choosing to agree with you. I was a downgrade. Not from Derek. From the version of myself I kept shrinking to fit into your family's idea of acceptable. I'm done downgrading." She opened her mouth, closed it. She had prepared for several versions of this conversation. She had not prepared for this one. 6 weeks into Dubai, I was on a video call with my contractors. Skyline behind me, the kind of backdrop that doesn't need explaining, when my phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen. Gerald Simmons. A number I recognized from years of Laura's contact list. I let it ring. Finished my meeting. Then called back 30 minutes later. Gerald sounded different. The performance was gone. The authority, the armchair confidence, the voice of a man measuring everyone who came near his daughter. What was left underneath sounded like what he actually was. A man past 60 who had built his identity around standards he'd borrowed and was only now understanding the cost. He started with small talk. I let him. Then he said, "I've been thinking about the kind of man you always were to this family, son." I was quiet for a moment. "Gerald." "Please," he said. "Just Gerald." With respect, I was never what you needed me to be. And I stopped trying to be. A long pause. Long enough that I looked out at the skyline just to have somewhere to rest my eyes. "I know," he said. "I know that now." I didn't celebrate it. Didn't say what I could have said, about the hospital bill, about Thanksgiving, about the bourbon he accepted without looking up. I just let the silence exist between us like a fair witness. "Derek's company folded," he said finally. "Both condos went into foreclosure last month. He's been asking Laura for money." I said nothing. "I hope she finds what she's looking for," I said after a moment. And I meant it. Genuinely. "Take care of yourself, sir." I hung up. My assistant knocked once and opened the door. "Mr. Carter? The second client wants to expand the contract. Long-term partnership. They want a meeting." "Set it," I said, and went back to work. It was almost midnight Dubai time when my phone lit up on the desk. Laura's name. I hadn't deleted her contact, not out of sentiment but because I had never been the kind of man who rewrote history by erasing names. I opened the message. "I miss you. I think I made a mistake. Can we talk?" I set the phone down. Went back to the proposal I was reviewing. Finished the paragraph. Read it back. Then picked the phone up again. I typed slowly. Not out of hesitation, out of precision. Because what I wanted to say deserved to be said exactly right. "Laura, I genuinely wish you well. But the woman who said what you said to me that night wasn't wrong. You were right to say it. Because the man standing in your kitchen that night, trying to prove himself to people who'd already decided, that man was a downgrade. Not from Derek. From himself. I rebuilt him. He's not available anymore. Take care." I hit send. Set the phone face down. Went back to work. Somewhere in Columbus she read it. Then read it again. I don't know how long she sat with it. But I know the feeling of reading something that arrives too late to be useful. The particular stillness of understanding a thing after the window has closed. I had lived in that stillness for 3 years. Now it was hers. I worked until 1 a.m. Then made coffee. Stood at the window with the Dubai skyline spread out below me, lit up, indifferent, magnificent, and thought about my father at the kitchen table. The pen. The bill. The silence that wasn't defeat but discipline. Build in silence. I had. Let success make the noise. Was starting to. 14 months later I landed in Columbus on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus picked me up. He was already laughing at something on his phone before I reached the car, and when I asked what was funny he just said, "Get in first." In the car he handed me his phone. A local business outlet had run a piece. Someone had leaked it, probably a contractor, probably intentionally. Columbus man's logistics firm lands $2.1 million international deal, founder returns home. The comments were flooded. Hundreds of them. And buried in the thread, posted from an account with a private profile picture, were 4 words that were clearly, unmistakably Laura. "I know him." Someone had replied underneath, "Do you though?" I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and unguarded, the first one like it in 14 months. "Delete that," I told Marcus. "Absolutely not," he said. "This is a historical document." But what Marcus didn't know yet, what nobody knew, was what had happened at the arrival's exit 20 minutes earlier, before we'd even reached the parking structure. A woman I had met through a mutual professional contact in Dubai, Dr. Renee Okafor, had been standing at the exit holding a small card with just my last name on it. Carter. Printed. Clean. No performance in it. She was a physician turned healthcare logistics consultant who had been emailing me for months about a potential business partnership. Brilliant, composed, unhurried. Marcus saw her. Looked at me. "Who is?" "A partner," I said. The way I said it, no explanation, no performance, no audition, made Marcus go quiet for a full 5 seconds. Then he nodded slowly, the way he nodded when something made complete sense, and pulled out of the parking structure without another word. I was home. But I was not the same man who had left. 3 weeks after I returned, Patricia Simmons sent a text. Formal, warm, slightly careful. The kind of message you compose and revise several times before sending. Joshua, we'd love to have you over for dinner sometime. Gerald and I have been thinking about you. It would mean the world to us. I read it on a Tuesday morning between 2 meetings. Set my phone down. Made a note in my planner about a 2 p.m. call. Got up and poured coffee. Came back. Read it again. I didn't call Marcus. Didn't ask Renee. Didn't process it out loud to anyone. I just sat with it quietly, the way my father sat with hard things at that kitchen table, turning them over without noise until the right response settled clearly. That evening I typed my reply. 2 sentences. I read them once. Then sent them without changing a word. Thank you, Patricia. I don't do return visits to places that asked me to leave. No anger in it. No cruelty. No performance. Just a door, the specific kind that closes not with a slam but with a quiet, permanent click that everyone in the hallway hears and understands immediately. I put my phone in my pocket, picked up my jacket from the back of my chair, and walked out of my office into an evening that was entirely, uncomplicatedly mine. No audition. No comparison. No bourbon I bought for a man who looked through me. Just the city outside and the version of myself I had finally stopped downgrading. The noise my father promised was everywhere now. I had built it in silence. And I never looked back.